Council Member Sprague is going to be here shortly. Councilmember Vauden.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hudson,
Present.
Mayor Hanson.
Here. Thank you, Amos. Item 4, public comment. Individuals wishing to address the city council concerning the budget workshop are invited to make oral comments of up to 3 minutes at this time. Please address your comments to the mayor and council members and not to staff and or the audience. And by state law, the council is not permitted to undertake any action or discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Are there any public comments in reference to the budget workshop today? Any public comments? Yes, sir. It's not required, but it is appreciated if you do state your name for the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's always good to see the council. Appreciate everyone. Appreciate your work. I'm Dan Gupton and I'm president of the Willows Library Board. I know you guys see the reports, but I just wanted to give you a very quick summary of the ones for January, February, March, and April. And to give you just a look at the use of the library. Computer use, those are the people that come in that don't have computers, and that ranges from kids to seniors. Average is 130 a month. Door count per average per month is 793. And ebooks, which boy, a lot of people love the ebooks. And that's coming up, and that's 206 per month. We're coming up to our upcoming summer reading program, and we're hopeful it'll equal or exceed last year's average with June, July, and August, which was 837. So just letting you know that when people come to the library, it's the Willows Library for them. And it's something that's important, or we wouldn't have the numbers we have. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupton. Mr. Hoover, let the record reflect that Mr. Sprague is present at 2:03 p.m.
Apologize, I don't always wear these appliances except for these meetings. Sometimes I forget. Thank you for your indulgence.
Yep, you're welcome. Is there any additional public comment today? If so, please approach the podium. Thank you for all the work that you do out there. Hard work day in and day out, around the clock. Much appreciated. If there's no further public comment, move on to item 5, budget workshop for fiscal year 2024 or 2025, preliminary budget review. We're going to receive the presentation of the fiscal year 2024-2025 preliminary budget for the city's main operating funds and provide direction to staff as a proposed budget is developed and considered in June 2024. And the presenters are Andy Heath, our financial consultant, and Marty Brown, our city manager. Good afternoon, Marty and Andy, and good to see you both. Marty.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to take a few minutes to say a little bit more than I usually do when I introduce Andy to speak and present on the proposed budget for this next year. So as you know, Andy will be presenting a proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25. It includes budget cuts and changes, as well as potential cost saving and revenue generating measures. And as you've already noted, all of our city employees that are currently working here today at City Hall and the Corporation Yard and the fire station are present in council chambers today. On the way into work this morning, I was thinking about this presentation and thinking about a word that this budget presentation means to me. And I think to all of us here, all the employees. And the word that came to mind is sacrifice. This past year, there's been a lot of sacrifice. This proposed budget is more sacrifice. And when I say sacrifice, I mean not having enough staffing. We actually are now below staffing. We're going to be below staffing for the next 6 to 12 months. In addition to that, I'm so proud of our employees and all the extra effort and work that they put in every single day here. They look for ways to save money, whether it's in the fire department, fixing a broken AC unit, taking home a fire truck to their house to fix it, driving extra far to Oakdale to fix a fire truck because the hourly wage is less than in Sacramento. And so it's a 6-hour round trip instead of 3 hours. the extra work that the Public Works Department does, taking on rental units when we had a rental property company before doing our work. Now they do it, saving $2,500 a year for the city. But there's things like that that happen every single day. We have a mechanic that's on long-term disability. Both Public Works and the fire department have to look for other ways to fix their apparatus and equipment, and that has been a tremendous challenge and struggle to do that at a price point that we can afford. Most of those repairs are outside of the budget. We do not hear budget for maintenance, and especially not for emergencies. And so as the council has seen over the last year, we've spent nearly $80,000 in outside emergencies and expenditures that were not planned for because we don't have the money to plan for it, quite frankly. In Public Works, in addition to rental properties, we've gone without a custodian in this city hall, and Public Works people have done custodial work for months at a time. In fact, that's happening right now. We're down a maintenance worker. We lost a maintenance worker last fall in November, and we made the decision not to fill the position because of the city's budget crisis. That puts a tremendous strain on the Public Works Department, who are all here in the audience today. It's very difficult to do all the work because it doesn't change. The work doesn't get less. There aren't fewer parks when you're down a Public Works person. There aren't fewer trees or sidewalks to repair or a wastewater treatment plant to take care of and repair. All of those things continue on in the same emergencies, but with fewer people. I think it goes without saying that it has been a tremendous strain on this city, on the staff, to continue to work here under these pressures without enough staff and enough money to do the work that we need to do to serve the citizens of Willows with the services that they deserve. Today's presentation is not an action item. It is a discussion item, and it is an opportunity for the council to ask questions of Andy Heath, to give us your input, your direction, before we come back for an action item at the end of June. And if it pleases the council and any of the employees have any questions of Andy and about the budget, please, I encourage you to ask those questions now. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy.
Thank you, Marty.
Great, thank you, Marty. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, for the record, Andy Heath, the city's financial consultant. Marty mentioned what I'd like to do today is just run through something similar to what we did last year at this time, where we knew that the general fund was faced with some issues at this time last year. And as part of that, we wanted to bring a preliminary budget for just the general fund last year to have a discussion with the council on where we saw things going. This year, taken that and have actually expanded it to include the city's operating funds, which would include the sewer enterprise fund and some of the main special revenue funds that I think have a bearing on some of the service delivery in the future, particularly next year. So as part of today's presentation, okay, so as part of today's presentation, what I'll be doing is going through the preparation process and some of the things that were considered as this was put together. We'll look specifically at the general fund and then general fund changes and additions that have been coordinated and will likely be recommended to your city council in a month when we bring back the budget. We'll look at the general fund forecast and the update to that. The city council's seen this forecast numerous times. And we update that forecast as often as we can because, as you know, budgetary and fiscal realities are very fluid. And a budget is only good on the day it's adopted. Tomorrow it can change, and it typically does change. So we have to be aware of the things that are going on. Then we'll go through the enterprise funds, which is the sewer fund and the now waning water fund. And then we'll look at some of the other special revenue funds before we open it up for questions and direction from the council. All right, so when we looking at the budget preparation process, so the budget preparation builds on the general fund base budget. Keep in mind that the base budget is the budget that is required to deliver a desired set of services. So your council has, through the budgetary process, identified a desired set of services that require X number of staff, and also non-personnel related, and in some cases, capital outlay related expenditures to deliver those services, that level of service to the community. That level of service is, well, it should be funded by an offsetting amount of revenue that becomes your discretionary revenue sources. Things like transient occupancy tax, sales tax, property tax, development fees, those sorts of things that come into the city to offset that desired level of service you want to provide. So we've looked at that base budget. And we've updated it since you last saw that base budget update, which was on January 17th with the mid-year. And we've taken that and rolled that into next year's focus. We reviewed an update of citywide main operating funds, looking at service delivery, cost allocation in some cases, and focus on the city's capital improvement plan and the delivery of capital projects. Coordinated with staff to determine fiscal needs to provide critical services. So these are some of the things that they might need in some of the, actually in all of the departments in the city. We've looked at future revenue and expenditure trends and forecasts, and that's particularly important for your city. As you know, right now, there are significant inflationary pressures that are impacting all the costs for what we provide, not just the typical staples type costs or service type costs, but insurance costs and retirement costs, benefit costs, all those things are going up because of inflation. And then ultimately information and direction received from preliminary budget discussion. This discussion today will serve as the foundation for what we're bringing back to you in a month. Slide, please. This is the preliminary general fund budget. So you can see here that right now, from a base perspective and building in any one-time things that typically actually, for all the one-time things that we have built into fiscal 24-25 that aren't part of the current budget, they have an offsetting revenue. So there's very few of those. So there's no really one-time issues on either side of the equation that are new to next year's proposed budget. But the preliminary budget right now, on the revenue side, you have $5.6 million in revenue. And you can see on the expenditure side, you have $6.4 million in expenditures. A significant imbalance of just under $800,000 exists in the general fund, where revenues are lower than expenditures at the base level. This use of reserves to balance next year's budget right now is required due to a systemic operating deficit that exists. Where again, that current base level of expenditures is not enough to provide a desired set of base level expenditures. And then you have expenditure growth that continues to exceed revenue growth. That is the inflationary pressures on the expenditures that you currently, for the services that you currently provide, are growing at a faster pace than the revenue by which feeds them and pays for them. Next slide. On the revenue side, some of the things that are built into the budget for fiscal 24-25 are 2% growth in property tax. And this could be a little bit more. Property tax growth in the city of Willows hasn't been rampant over the last few years. It's grown anywhere between 2%, maybe 4%. But to be conservative, I put 2% in there. 2% is the maximum that it can grow, consistent with Prop 13. The only way you really get more than 2% is to the extent you have development, significant development, candidly, that will add to your property tax base, add to your assessed valuation of your city. It can grow if you have homes that are repurchased for a price that is higher than for what the home is assessed at when it gets sold. You have a little bit of that going on, and we can monitor that because we actually receive another tax based on that called the real property transfer tax. And then it can also grow based on the Prop 8 rule, where you have homes that have been adjusted below the base value due to, for example, in the recession. A lot of homes went below their base because, you know, the recession hit And the assessor, once the recession's over, has the opportunity to actually grow that back up to a base as things come back. You don't have very much on your Prop 8 roll, I don't believe, because I don't see a lot of change in the property tax above that 2%. So 2%, although it's a conservative number, I think it's going to be pretty close to 2%. Sales tax and transient occupancy tax have been adjusted to reflect the current level of collections. Right now, your sales tax is pretty level. It's not growing at a significant pace, and it's not decreasing at a significant pace. Okay, but like pretty much every city in California, at least the ones that I'm familiar with and work with, there's not a lot of sales tax growth going on right now. Transient occupancy tax has actually declined. When you look at TOT and the collections of TOT compared to prior years, the level of TOT has gone down. And you'll see one of the proposals that we have before you today to actually go in and do a review or an audit of the TOT to make sure that we're receiving what we should be receiving, consistent with the TOT and the municipal code. A continuation of appropriate cost allocations to the sewer enterprise fund. So one of the things we did at mid-year and have been doing is really identify the costs that are attributable to be spread to other funds based on the services that are provided citywide that have a nexus to the other funds, particularly administrative costs, where Marty is managing the city as a whole. You have finance functions that manage the budget as a whole that include numerous other funds and the activities supported by those funds. It only makes sense to distribute those costs associated with providing those activities at some equitable level to those funds. And in your case, you really only have one fund, and that is the sewer enterprise fund. Inclusion of reimbursed costs associated with planning and engineering activities. So in the 24-25 budget, you have some planning activities, development related, and engineering activities, also development related, that are likely to be reimbursed by the developers for the full costs associated with providing those services. 35,000 each is built in for both planning and engineering. It's an offset. So you'll see an increase in the budget for 35,000 for each of those things, but you'll also see an increase on the revenue side for that 70,000 coming in. The CAL FIRE grant, it's included for one more year. So the city received a grant from CAL FIRE. It's just under $211,000 for the CAL FIRE grant. The importance of that grant is paramount because it helps supplant some of the existing services that are provided by your fire department. And what I mean is by saying supplants those services, it's that grant is paying for existing levels of service. Okay. Once that grant expires, which will be at the end of next year, you won't have that anymore. Okay. And ultimately, you will still be providing services consistent with having 4 firefighters, some of whose costs today, this year and next year budgetarily are being offset by that grant. So that will go away. And I have a slide that will show you the impacts of that. Also using $264,208 in what we believe will be the remaining American Rescue Plan Act funds that will be remaining after the close of this fiscal year. And using those ARPA funds for in the operational budget for the police services contract. So as you know, the police services contract went up significantly to $2 million in the current year, and it's going to be $2 million again next year, and it's going to continue to rise each year after that, consistent with the current contract. So we're proposing to use the 264 remaining in ARPA that's likely to be there for that police contract next year. Next slide. On the expenditure side, so we have public safety consulting, $10,000 that's been added to the city manager's budget, and that is to look at other alternatives that may be available to providing public safety aside from the Glenn County Sheriff's Office contract. So what might exist? How can we do it? Is there some more efficient means? Is there some more cost-effective means to do this? And we think that that money will help to identify any options that might exist. In the city attorney's office, in special projects, we built in 25,000 additional there. And these are for projects above the retainer cost. But we just realized after this presentation was prepared that we could reduce that from 25,000 to 16,000. So there might be $9,000 that won't need to be in the budget for next year for that. Finance Department personnel costs, and keep in mind that the Finance Department has been in flux for some time. It's had staff and it hasn't had staff, and it's had staff and it hasn't had staff. And right now it does have 2 staff members, and this budget assumes that those 2 positions are are basically filled for the entirety of next year. Okay, so that's why you see that large $55,000 increase from the current year estimated amounts, because keep in mind, the current year estimated amounts assume that, well, they have built in the reality of vacancy savings after Katie left and after Lori left and before the 2 current individuals were hired. So you've got that built in, screwing up this budget to be fully staffed, and then ultimately transitioning a staff member into a higher level position to manage more of the day-to-day aspects of the finance department. Because let's face it, I'm not going to be here forever. And there are certain things that I'm doing today that will need to be done if I'm not here anymore. You have a budget to prepare, you have an audit to undertake, and there's a significant amount of work that goes into preparing the budget and facilitating an audit that needs to be correct and right. And you know, if you don't have contractual help to help you do that, somebody on staff has to do that. So you've got to have that backdrop. There's also reporting that needs to be done on an annual basis to the state controller's office for a lot of finance needs. There's reporting to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for CDBG needs. There's just a lot of things that are very fluid in the realm of finance that will need to continue to be done. And I'll be around for as long as I can, and I'm happy to work for this town. I really like working for this town. I think that, you know, it's come a long way, but at the same time, I'll be 60 years old, you know, in March, and I'm just not going to do this forever. So your council needs to think about transitioning that function at some point in time over the next couple of years to something different. Community development personnel costs. This also assumes that you are fully staffed for the entirety of the year for the 2 positions that are in that department, which would be the community and public services director, and then you also have a technician in that department as well. So that 39,000 just again assumes no vacancy saving and trues that budget up. We have a slight increase in information technology contract. PG&E cost increases go without saying. The police services contract is built in at $2 million. And we have that engineering cost that are increasing because of 2 reasons. We're adjusting the base by 30,000 just because of the amount of engineering work that was under budgeted before. And then another 35,000 in that engineering budget to account for the reimbursable costs that are built in on the revenue side. Next slide, please. Also on the expenditure side, again, can't reiterate this enough. This assumes that all positions are filled for the entirety of the fiscal year. It builds in no salary savings whatsoever, with the exception of 1 position in Public Works that's currently vacant, that is frozen basically for the entirety of next year's budget. Okay, and that's a maintenance worker position. But your positions, you have 19 authorized positions right now. 18 of those are filled. Okay, so this budget funds 18 positions. It funds a city manager. It funds a city clerk. It funds 2 positions in the finance department. It funds 2 positions in community development and public services. It funds 2 full-time positions in the library, which also has a contingent of part-time positions. It funds a contingent of part-time positions in the recreation department. It funds 6 public works and streets folks, where there would typically be 7 because 1's vacant. We're only recommending funding for 6. And it funds 4 individuals in the fire department. That is what you have to work with. And that goes to the point that the city manager made a little bit earlier, where she's discussing a very minimal staff to provide a very wide array of services that your community provides. You have recreation, you have library, you have public works, you have streets, you have administrative functions, you have a lot of different things that your city does. And to do that with 18 funded positions, I will tell you will be a challenge. And then also only negotiated and approved salary increases are included So that means right now, built into this forecast, there are no salary increases included in the numbers that you're seeing. Police contract costs are also programmed to increase each year, and that amount is built into the base forecast that you will see. Next slide, please. Looking at the general fund and some of the revenue characteristics associated with the general fund. So I'll just call it the big three, but the big three revenue sources are comprised of property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. Those three things that are very, very dependent on the state of the economy make up 77% of your general fund base revenues. And basically, those revenue sources are not keeping pace in their growth when you compare them to the growth of expenditures. Okay, so growth of expenditures, very hampered by inflation right now, very hampered by cost increases in insurance, cost increases in retirement, cost increases in health benefits. So those are significant expenses that the city must pay for to be a city, number one, for insurance, and then to have employees providing services to the city, number two. That are basically outpacing, those costs are outpacing the revenue. Then you have a recent reliance over the last couple of years on one-time funding to fund critical citywide needs. And that's where we talk about the fire and the public works grants. So the fire chief did an amazing job over the last couple of years, really garnering funding for the city and getting a lot of great grants. And one of those grants that I mentioned just a little bit ago, Cal Fire actually supplanted his costs and offset those costs for the duration of that grant. So those are, you're relying on those right now. Ultimately, those grants will expire and they're going to go away. And then also we have ARPA funding that has been used for various general fund needs over time. And for other needs too, outside of the general fund, particularly the water line placement. Or water line reconnection to Cal Water. But anyway, it's just really important to recognize that you've been relying on a lot of one-time money for your existing operational budget. Next slide. And the expenditure characteristics for the general fund. So again, can't reiterate this enough. Inflation is impacting the everyday costs of providing services, labor benefits particularly, and then utilities costs. Labor and benefits. Existing number of staff and related costs required to deliver desired level of services. So you have a lot of things that you do. And I did mention this, I put down administration, public works, community development, fire, library, recreation. And then you also have certain contracts with for certain services that you provide that you just have to because you don't have enough staff to provide them. And that would be mainly your police function, which you need to have, and then select administrative functions, things like building inspections, things like finance, and putting your budget together or putting your audit together, those sorts of things. So you do have some contracts for that. Next slide. And then rounding out the expenditure characteristics. So this budget only captures the known fiscal activity, as I mentioned, at any given time. So we tried to, as a group, come up with exactly what we think is going to be required to deliver the existing level of service that you have today. And probably not even that much because we're recommending that your budget be reduced by one position, by that maintenance. Okay, so something's going to give without having that position there. The city always encounters, on top of this, unforeseen needs as the year progresses. And the city manager mentioned that at the outset of this conversation, where you have things like vehicle and maintenance needs, community safety needs, and those sorts of things that are just required, replacing the air conditioner so that your employees can come to work, changing a chassis out on a car, or fixing something that is broken in a park. All of these things pop up that are just not funded, but you can't not do that. You have to fund these things, okay? And during last year, or just during the current year, there's been about $80,000 in those expenditures. So the city manager mentioned. So please keep in mind that these things will pop up next year. We just don't know what they are until they do. Next slide. Okay, this is your general fund forecast. So taking all of that into account, everything I just went over, and obviously building in a lot of hypotheticals, and building in a lot of assumptions, hopefully, which are educated, and intelligent assumptions. This is what your, forecast will look like, in the coming year. So you can see next year's budget has an imbalance of just about $805,000. But that imbalance grows in 25-26 by over $500,000 to just under 1.4. It stays at that level in 26-27, and then it grows a little bit more in 27-28. The reason why you have the $500,000 variance between 24-25, next year's preliminary budget basically, and the year after that is because, again, that CAL FIRE grant is dropping off. You have a $355,000 increase in your police services contract from $2 million to $2.35 million. And you have an unfunded liability cost with CalPERS. It's actually going to go up another $35,000. So all of these things play into that $500,000 difference between what we're proposing for next year and the year after that. And that's how a lot of those one-time things, like the CAL FIRE grant, when they come out, this shows your reality providing an existing level of service based on what we absolutely know in certain cases. For example, the police services contract that you have right now says $2 million for next year, but it says 2.355 the year after that. Then it grows to, I think, 2.6 the year after that. Okay, and that's what your contract currently says. Well, that's built into this, okay? And that's not going to give you any extra level of service that you're not seeing today. That is just to provide a level of service that you are seeing today. Okay, so those costs are real, and costs are growing at a significantly higher pace than your revenue growth, which means you really need to focus on the cost side always. Okay, but you can only nickel and dime so much on the cost side. All right, especially with numbers like $1 million. You have to do something significant to get that $1 million deficit down on the cost side. The revenue side is where the most opportunity exists, more than likely, to help to solve this issue. Next slide, please. So this is what your fund balance looks like, assuming all of the years in that forecast slide that you just saw come to fruition. So you can see now at the end of this year, we're pegged to just over $1 million left in fund balance. And then next year, if you use the $800,000, you'll have just over $200,000 left, which means once you go into fiscal 25-26, probably in the first month, you're going to be out of money. You'll be out of fund balance. There will be no more general fund balance to offset costs. And some may say, well, we can use money in the other funds to help offset costs and pay them back. Can't really do that. Okay, your general fund has to be sustainable. It has to be a going concern. It has to be able to deliver on the revenue side for the costs on the expenditure side. So pretty critical there. Next slide. Okay, so fund balance improvement opportunity in the general fund. And this is just what we've come up with on the staff side. And some of the steps, some of these options you know about already. But again, review and update of the master fee schedule, and I think that's currently underway. And that has an opportunity to bring in, a little more city. It's not going to solve the problem by any means, but it could bring in a little bit more based on an update of the fees and making sure that the city is being fully reimbursed for what it costs to deliver the services associated with the functions that those fees pay for. Analyze potential revenue impacts from implementation of the transaction and use or additional sales tax that's currently on the table, consistent with many other cities in the greater region. This is probably where your biggest change can occur. Bringing in that sales tax will make a significant dent in that deficit. Perform a one-time audit of your TOT to make sure you're receiving what you should be receiving from the, I think, the six motels that pay your TOT right now, and to assure the proper collection of that. That'll cost about $2,500 to do, but I'm pretty certain it's going to bring in more than $2,500 based on the findings that they get. Review revenue generating opportunities from sale of city assets. So I'm not sure what city assets the city has to sell. This could be something that you could look at. I think that there are a couple of homes that the city owns that could potentially be sold. But keep in mind that the sale of city assets, although it will generate revenue and bring money into the city's general fund, it's one-time money. It doesn't solve your systemic issue associated with budget imbalances. So it will help alleviate immediate issues. Next slide. Okay, so that's it for the. No, that slide didn't print. Okay, well, okay, so we have some more fund balance opportunities, so that's good. Okay, so there may be opportunities to further reduce the base costs in the city. So on the cost side, looking at opportunities so we can review the options again for public safety service delivery. So that consultant is built into your budget for next year. A nominal amount might cost a little more than that, but nonetheless, there's something in there. Analyze cost recovery opportunities. So we've talked about this. We've looked at the sewer fund. I don't think there's anything more we can get out of the sewer fund based on what's in there right now. But there may be other cost recovery opportunities, maybe with some of the transportation related funds where some of the street folks costs can be offset by, certain things that are collected in gas tax or RMRA, SB1 monies or such. So haven't really analyzed that to its fullest extent. And then review cost savings opportunities associated with providing purely discretionary services that the city provides that some cities don't provide because they either outsource stores to a JPA or they're managed by the county or some other organization. And that would be recreation and your recreation function when you take into account the recreation and the management of the parks that you have and the swimming pool. The net cost to the city's general fund that's built into the budget is about $28,000. And when you look at the library and you take into account the cost that's built into the general fund for providing library services and the staff that go to support that, and you subtract the amount that typically comes from Glenn County for support of the library, which is $77,000. The true net cost to the general fund for the library is $211,000. Those are the discretionary services that have been identified. Next slide. Okay, so that will round out the general fund. Now, very quickly, I'll just go through the other funds that make up your operating budget, at least as defined for purposes of this presentation. In the sewer fund, you have revenues that are estimated in the coming year at just over $2 million. Expenditures at just under 4.9. Wow, there's a big imbalance there. And that imbalance is because there's a lot of capital activities that are actually built in for the sewer fund. Keep in mind that your sewer fund has several $1 million that are set aside that were generated from the refunding of a bond issue that actually brought more money into the sewer fund, knowing that the sewer fund had significant capital needs ahead of it. So that money is still there and it's earning a significant amount of interest right now. Somewhere around $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a month in interest, but all of that money nonetheless has to be used for sewer and only can be used for sewer capital projects. In the sewer fund, assuming we bring in the 2 million and spend the 4.9, at the end of next year, you'll still have about $2.4 million left in sewer fund reserves. And there would be just over $1 million of that is the bond proceeds that I mentioned. So we're looking at using, I think, close to maybe $3 million of the bond proceeds next year to do some of these projects. And some of those projects include work on multiple lift stations, the Lassen Street sewer rehabilitation, wastewater treatment plant improvements, upgrades and the annual sewer replacement project, and the Shasta Butte replacement project. So there's a lot of activity built in for the sewer fund. The sewer fund budget also charges $255,000 is charged, $255,000, $357,000 for that overhead reimbursement that I mentioned from the general fund. So that includes the administrative components that are built in for things like IT, for things like city hall use, for things like staff administration, and also public works staff costs where public works folks spend a portion of their time, on the sewer fund. That $255,000 number is what's budgeted, okay? It may not necessarily be what the actual costs are. And because it's built conservatively, on the revenue side for the general fund, more than likely it will be just a little bit less than $255,000. And that is because you have assumed as part of this budget, no vacancy savings for the whole year, okay? And it assumes that 25% of each person in public works, with the exception of the mechanic, will spend 25% of their time on sewer fund activities. When we do this transfer, we only transfer what actually happened. Okay, we don't just do a flat 25% transfer. We actually go back and do an accounting for how much time was actually spent in the sewer fund and to only transfer that. So that $255,000 just represents a budgeted number. One thing I like to call out for enterprises, particularly water and sewer for cities, is what the operating margin is in the fund. So what the operating margin looks at is it looks at regularly recurring revenues. In this case, it would only be the rates that are collected and the interest earnings that come in. And that's the revenue side. And on the expenditure side, you look at what it typically costs to provide sewer services. So essentially everything except for capital, right? And that you come up with the operating margin. And what that operating margin represents is how much money your enterprise has to provide for people capital. So the sewer fund right now, the operating margin is about $276,000. That's a good number. You've got a lot of it. Because you've got a lot of money right now from prior bond proceeds. It needs to be spent only on capital. And after that, you will be adding in an additional $276,000. And it hopefully grows because you have a couple more years left on your rate study. And that will grow a little bit more so that you have money in the future to offset any permit compliance costs or costs that the state may throw down to make sure that water's clean as it leaves your sewer. Next slide. Water fund, so nothing. So hopefully, at the end of this fiscal year, we can close the water fund out and transfer all that activity over to Cal Water. There has been, I think it's done, actually.
It is done and it's been transferred.
Yeah. So there you go. So Cal Water is all ready to go. That fund will be closed out in the current fiscal year. And there'll be nothing left in fund balance, and all the activity has been transferred to the Cal Water system. Next slide. In the gas tax funds, about $181,000 will come in, offset by $113,000 in expenditures. At the end of the day, assuming we spend that $113,000 next year, you'll still have just under $300,000 in fund balance. Gas taxes, again, can be used for anything, transportation, and more importantly, streets related, including streets maintenance, street cleanup, those sorts of things. So if you can find some costs in the general fund that are have a nexus to what I just mentioned in terms of transportation and streets costs, that $285,000 may help offset some of those costs that are otherwise borne by the general fund right now. And those are some of the cost recovery alternatives we need to continue to look at. There's a plan to transfer, however, right now, $45,000, but it's built into that $113,000 in expenditures for street worker costs to the general fund. Okay. And then you have capital projects that right now only include $6,827 appropriated for the street maintenance program. And this is just consistent with what's in the CIP. I thought that was odd, and it was low, especially just an unround number like that. So I think that between now and when we bring the budget back to you in June, we'll get together with the city engineer to make sure that you've got money available for transportation and you have identified in your CIP street maintenance program projects that need to be undertaken and completed. Then this city or this fund actually has the funding capacity to handle some of that. So we'll look at that. Next slide. In your RMRA or Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Act, your SB1 money, about $167,000 in revenue, offset by 158,000 in expenditures. And you'll still have about $463,000 at the end of the day, assuming you do that. These also can be used for any transportation purpose. You do need to identify with the state of California each year what you plan on spending that money on, because you can't use this money to supplant any former transportation related purposes consistent with SB 1 law. Capital projects right now, basically all of the expenditures are for capital projects, and they're appropriated for the street reconstruction and resurfacing program for next year. Next slide. RSTP, the Regional Surface Transportation Program. This is another transportation funding option that comes into the city, has its own fund. Right now, we're projecting about $100,000 based on RSTP exchange monies that could flow through the county. This is just an estimate, and we've identified 105,000 in expenditures. Those expenditures include capital projects, 66,000 for the annual sidewalk maintenance program, and 39,000 towards the street resurfacing program. So that is your RSTP fund. Next slide. Community discretionary fund. Just wanted to mention this fund as one of your main operating funds because it used to be just that, and it's slowly not becoming one of your operating. This year or for next year, we've identified $5,890 in revenue that's likely to transpire in the community discretionary fund. And this money represents defederalized money from the city's CDBG loan program for loan repayments that are made by existing folks that have CDBG loans. And to the extent those loan payments are less than $35,000 each year, the city has the opportunity and option to defederalize the money and get it out of the CDBG program, which would otherwise need to be reloaned or given back to the state, and defederalizing that money and using it for any general purpose that the city sees fit. The city's had this fund in place for a long time, ever before I was around. And at one point in time, there were numerous loans that have now since been paid off that were feeding this fund. And then the city ultimately used this fund for economic development related activities. Okay, things like membership in the League of California Cities, things like membership in LAFCO, memberships in economic development related groups like 3Corps and such. So chamber funding has come out of this. I've seen that in the past. So you've got this money that's coming in, but the money is not coming in at the level that it used to come in. Okay. No reason other than there's just not as many loans out there to be paid back. The $5,890 represents the amount that's been received last year and in current year and likely to be received next year based on amortization schedules of loans in that fund. We've identified 13,500 in expenditures that basically only includes the property tax assessments associated with the parcels that the city owns, not property taxes, but the assessments on those parcels. Okay. City is not exempt from paying assessments for things like sewer service or whatever else is put on outside of the 1% ad valorem tax. So that needs to be paid. And then your annual LAFCO fees are also built into that number. So you can see that this fund, we're basically spending all the money that comes in on those two things. So there's only going to be $813 left at the end of the day. Next slide. Okay, getting towards the end here. American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARPA, and that fund in fiscal 24-25, there is no revenue coming in. All of this revenues was received in two tranches, which received at the beginning of last fiscal year and the beginning of the fiscal year before that. You might recall it was a COVID relief money that was put out by the federal government under the American Rescue Plan Act that was approved. The city has spent essentially by the end of this current fiscal year, if we spend everything we've earmarked the money for, which your council has seen, there'll be about $294,208 left in ARPA. That money will go to two things. It'll go to pay for the balance of the master fee schedule update, 30,000 there. And then, as we mentioned earlier, offsetting costs associated with the public safety contract with Glenn County for 264,208. At the end of next fiscal year, all of your ARPA money will be spent, which is a good thing because there's timelines associated with when you need to spend it by. Next slide. That concludes the preliminary budget overview. Again, this discussion and presentation is just meant to give you the lay of the land as we see it right now. And what this council needs to, it basically has to work with as we prepare the budget over the course of the next month. So with that, I will stop, and myself and staff will be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for your in-depth presentation, Andy. Much appreciated.
If I could, I'd like to
Yes,
just add one
please.
thing.
Yes.
We did not include in the presentation other ideas or concepts for finance mechanisms for the city to possibly bridge the time frame when there is, assuming possibly that the sales tax measure passes, or if it doesn't, either way. Either way, we haven't included any of those additional financing mechanisms that might be possible. That's going to be a separate presentation that's going to come back to the council later this summer. We did, the few things that were mentioned in this were really kind of decisions that could be made as part of the budget process now, not really these other ideas and concepts, bonds, borrowing against city property. All of that is a much more complicated conversation that wouldn't be part of this budget process. So we are keeping those separate. So I did want to let you know, though, something will be coming back for further discussion around increasing revenue. And, again, it's not a long-term solution, but it would bridge the time frame, hopefully, this next year that's going to be tight.
Very good, Marty. Thank you for that. Councilmember Thomas, questions, comments?
Gonna pick on me
Oh,
first.
sure, we'll pick on you first, Rick. Throw you to the wolves.
Okay, well, I gotta appreciate our staff, where they are and the frustrations in dealing with this, because sitting up this side, inflationary pressures on city, you're suffering those same things as well as everybody else in this office, in the room. So, I appreciate your patience while we try to figure out what we need to do. Clearly, we need a revenue source, an immediate revenue source, so I would suggest you take a good look at our sales tax measure and make a choice appropriate and do what you feel you necessarily need to do to raise our revenue source, because we do need that. I do believe, however, that I think our sales tax will be successful. I'm an optimist, especially when our fiscal reality becomes known across the city. I have some questions, and I'm a second-year council member, so I'm beginning to understand governmental budget-based accounting. Let me say that again. I'm beginning to understand. So I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm not trying to suggest that any one of these questions that I ask is suggesting that I want it to go away or I want it to be changed anyway. I just kind of want to know some answers. So when I look at it, you say we have a $790,000 budget deficit, but we're using the last of the ARPA money. So really we have $1,054,000 budget deficit
Correct.
operational.
That's right.
So this budget funds all of those particular positions. We currently have 18. We just, as a council, approved a job description and salary schedule for the finance director. That position's not filled because we know you're moving away eventually. As I understand it, that position will save the money, city money, by reducing your overhead, your costs, by bringing it on.
It will be something less than the $50,000 that is mentioned
So
there.
it'll be
Yes.
kind of a push.
I have built
By having
in
that source in-house,
Yeah.
right?
that $50,000 assumes, well, it does two things. It trues up all the staff costs, okay? But then I have also in next year's budget reduced the financial consulting cost by 30,000. So a part of that is already built in.
The goal is to transition away from you, bring it in-house. At kind of a zero
Tran-
change in our overhead expense, right?
transition some of the functions. Yes, that's right.
And I have some numbers here if you want them.
Well, I'm kind of swimming in numbers, so
Okay,
I don't need those right now.
understood.
You say we said we get $77,000 from the county for the library service, correct? Is that what I understood?
77,000 from the county for libraries.
Yeah, I think that's what we
Yeah.
received
And
typically.
so our budget for the library service is 289,000. And Jody, if you're in there, yeah, you're here. I truly appreciate what you do. I've enjoyed the library services and I don't want the library services to go away any way, shape or form. But I also looked at the Corning budget and I looked at the city of Palusa budget and those are all staffed totally by the county. Is that something that we could ask the county to assume in concert with the city of Orland?
I did as soon as I arrived here because I knew that that was the case in most counties throughout the state of California. That was not a welcome suggestion.
Maybe the council could actually formulate a more formal request at the county. I mean, that's 211,000 and you have a really nice article and with the reading program that's coming up, but it's the Orland Free Library, the Willis Public Library, Hamilton City Library, Elk Creek Library, and Bayless Library. All of that, every one of those libraries could be receiving people from the county or the cities of Orland or Willows, everywhere.
Which is why we receive funding from the county, because we do have county residents, obviously, that use the libraries too.
And I'm not trying to take away any budget from you. I'm just looking at a way that maybe we could save nickels and dimes. Well, $200,000 wouldn't be nickels or dimes. Just looking for a way that we might be able to help survive our financial situation.
Right. I think it's a lot to ask the county to completely take on all of that funding. It's not unusual for cities to also have their own libraries or to share that funding, which is what the county and obviously the city of Willows currently do. But whether or not that county funding is really adequate for the amount of services that we are providing the county residents, that is a question. It's something that we've, have talked to them about quite a bit in the past, and they have increased the funding a bit over the last 2 years, but I don't believe that it is at the level where it should be at.
So, Marty, maybe we could work on trying to find a better number that's more appropriate for the services that are actually being provided. Because we're a cooling center too for all of this part of the county as well.
Mhm.
Mall maintenance, we spend $12,500 on the mall maintenance. Do we see rent for the parking lot for the ground that we actually own?
No, we don't get any rent for the mall parking lot. No, we just provide the parking.
In commercial leasing arrangements that I've been experienced with, there is a square footage price for the space occupied and then another price for the parking lot. So for example, Willow Walk parking or Willow Walk building, which I believe the parking lot we own services that complex, am I right? We need to look into this. But if the municipal code says that you need X number of parking for X number of space, we should be able to say that particular unit, whether it be Daughtry's building or Willow Walk, owes X amount of dollars, offset that. Plus, I look at that parking lot and at some point in time, it's going to need to be repaved and repaired and resurfaced. So there needs to be some to build into that, to take care of it. I don't know if that 12.5 is just taking care of the flag part of the mall. Or
Yeah,
if it's taking
it's
care of the whole
probably-
parking lot,
Yeah, I would guess the whole parking lot itself.
sweeping it in the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So I think there should be a charge to the property buildings that are enjoying the use of that parking lot. It's not free. There's a cost to it and we should look into establishing a rent for that.
Yeah, we can look into an agreement for that. And I think a cost share of that, if it directly benefits the tenants and the owners of those buildings is reasonable.
I
Within
think that would be
bounds.
reasonable. On your handout, page 23 attached to the agenda. Citywide General Office. There's an expense for $100,000, 41,300 professional services. I'm not sure what that was for the special department fee of 55,500. Page 23 of the budget or the agenda attachment.
Professional services.
Yes.
That's IT.
Is that
A lot of that.
Most of that's
IT?
in it.
that's including Tyler and
Much,
Mason.
much of that type.
No, that Matsam and
Matsam
Item
and
are,
Item.
our IT services. Does it include Tyler?
Um,
I think that, isn't that still in capital project
no. I don't think so.
or in finance? Is it in finance department? I think it's in the finance.
Yeah, it might.
department. But Matsam and Isom,
The Tyler license is moved to finance. Yeah.
but Matsam and Isom that provides IT support to all the departments in all of the city is in
Correct.
citywide office.
I'm not suggesting it's an inappropriate charge, I just didn't know what it was.
Right, no, I
When
understand.
it comes to computers,
We'd
I
like
know
to
how to
change
turn it
that
on and I
someday.
know how to punch a button or two, but certainly safety and all the other nasty things out there need to be dealt with. And I know we have some major maintenance items. The building outside of this building needs to be painted. The shops down at the park need to be fixed. We don't have the revenue. So if we're successful in gaining new revenue sources, we'll be able to fix those as well as take care of all of our city staff, et cetera, that needs to be taken care of. Pardon me while I. Chief Monk. I don't know how this works, and I know that there's a fireman's code as to mutual aid. Willows has a great fire department as well as the Willows Rural Fire Department, and Orland has its fire department, and I know that they come to us and we go to them, and there's mutual quid pro quo, if you will, for that services. He just recently went to Hamilton City. Now, there's a cost to do that when fuel and consumables and all the other stuff. Is there ever an opportunity to collect or get recovery for that? And the second question to that is, what happens if one of our pieces of equipment get damaged or destroyed while on a mutual aid call? How does that get compensated?
So the countywide mutual aid plan, I'll start with that one. The countywide mutual aid plan states that whenever another agency is requested, they have no obligation to respond, but they can respond. It also says that any damages are covered by that responding agency. So just like if we were to go to Orland and crash our ladder truck or it gets burnt up,
Let's not do that.
that's on us. Just like if they were to come to us and they were to wreck their fire truck or mess up their fire truck on their fire, that's on them. So it's the responsibility of whoever's responding. That's who would be responsible for that, that damage. We do use Fire Recovery USA, to recover costs. We haven't traditionally done that for, calls for mutual aid calls. The reason being is because then they would have the same ability, like having a stroke. The reason being, right now, we're the only ones that are doing fire recovery in the county. But the concern that I would have is, say we go to Orland, right? Or we go to Our Toys or anywhere, and we send that property owner a bill. Right now, our citizens are, the way the resolution and the intent of the resolution that the city council passed was that we basically go after the insurance company and only the insurance company. If the insurance company doesn't pay, we forgive the cost of the invoice. That way our residents aren't getting given a big bill unless they're out of town or they were doing something illegal or grossly negligent. If we were to start going and billing, say, an Artois or an Orland resident for our fire services, there's nothing to stop them from coming and billing ours. So that's why we haven't really gone
Well,
and
I
billed.
understand because of the quality of service offered by Willows, quality of services offered by Orland, but it doesn't sound to me like Hamilton City or Lynn would rarely, if ever, or Kanawha ever come to Vardy.
So
Maybe I'm wrong.
Glencadora,
I don't know these questions.
so
I'm asking.
Glencadora, I actually requested them the other day and they sent an engine and a water tender. Hamilton City, in the 3 years that I've been the fire chief, we've gone there once for a call. And they, in the last, Hamilton City's came to us. It wasn't in the city. It was at John Mansville. They've came twice in the last probably 5 years. So Hamilton City is a pretty rare one that we go to mutual aid. Same thing like Capay. They're very rare for us to go to. The big ones that we respond mutual aid to is going to be Orland and Artois, and those are pretty mutually beneficial. Occasionally we go out to Glencadora. Most of the time it's because the incident's like right on the border. And so oftentimes dispatch doesn't know actually whose district it is. So they just send us both. And then while Kanawha has gotten better, we still are going out there. I'd say maybe once a month for some sort of call. Most recent being was a aircraft crash out at 68 and D. As far as I think that a lot of the mutual aid inconsistencies have gotten cleared up in the last year.
Okay.
Like I said,
We
the
might be
biggest one,
chasing I might be talking about nickels and dimes
yeah,
in the grand scheme of things. I just really didn't understand the whole picture.
yeah, and it's a delicate thing, right? Like
Very delicate.
it's a very delicate thing. You know, that automatic aid agreement that I
I
wrote
don't
back
want to
in,
mess that up.
no, that automatic aid agreement I wrote back in 2020, which was the first real comprehensive auto aid agreement that we've used in the county, which involved Orland, Artois, and Willows for structure fires. Orland and Willows get the most benefit for sure. Artois is like right in the middle, right? So they're that they have maybe 2 fires a year. But when they get the fires, they really, really need us because of their staffing, their equipment, things like that. But on the back end of that, they go to 15 fires in Orland and 15 fires in Willows now to get the help on the 2. So for the most part, I think it washes out. And I think the problems are relative to the agency, meaning while Artois maybe only gets 2 fires, those 2 fires oftentimes can be a big deal, right? Versus where we might get 10 or 15 in a year. We need the help, but it's not as badly, if that makes sense. So it kind of washes out.
Okay, thank you. There's no fat in this budget, is there, Andy?
Sorry.
There's no fat in this budget at all anywhere.
I don't think so. I tried to find it.
Well, I'm personally tired of being on a diet for the city of Willows, so we need to find a way to put some fat back in the process.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Mr. Vaughn?
Thank you, Mayor Hanson. I wasn't going to go down the lines. I have some line item questions that more educational, like Rick says, to learn and understand. But I want to say that you stated and opened your presentation identifying revenue as the key ingredient in our solution. That nickel and diming a budget that's already been nickeled and dimed and pennied and pesoed to death is probably not a viable solution. So the revenue component needs to be discussed and emphasized and dialogued and repeated over and over again, because while it's been said many times, it doesn't seem to stick. We spend, again, time talking about who, what, where, and when on a dollar, And we have two hotels that are on the drawing board, a Hampton Inn that says somehow isn't being built, a Home Two that is on the drawing board that's sitting, and there was a third one. And there are other revenue opportunities, and maybe Andy, from your other cities where they have found revenue, you can help us, tell us a little bit more of the how and some of the steps to whatever we need to do. But I would say that in the case of the Hampton, in the case of the Jack in the Box, which is sales tax, I think sales tax, and in the case of the Home Two, that what I would like to do is see us beat the drum, break the rules, change the game, and get those people on the ground because they represent revenue. I'd like to see the revenue component be the emphasis, the focus, the energy, and the dialogue about the budgets of the city of Willows. So I don't know quite how to make that happen. We get a lot of studies and reports that tell us what's wrong and what is, but they don't really give us a pathway to a solution. Anyway, so that's what I'd like to emphasize in my input to you and to the city and to anybody listening. Revenue, revenue, revenue. It sounds easy. No, it doesn't sound easy, and it isn't. I always want to see a balance sheet. I don't remember what the answer was, but I would love to see the assets, like the land we talk about selling. How much is it? What's it worth? What's it on the balance sheet as? So if we're going to sell land, what's it really worth? I've never seen that. There are fund balances throughout this report. When the year is done, will be $287,000 in this fund. When the year is done, there'll be 1.2 in this fund. On a balance sheet, I would assume there would be a list of these cash accounts, I call them, funds that are resting and identified or earmarked to specific tasks. Because it would give me a picture of the asset value of the community. So what are in these funds? And if they're restricted, like full-time equivalent students are in school budgets, then so be it. But I'd really like to see a balanced balance sheet. I do like these, since Rick was talking about sharing the responsibilities of fire and all the other functions. Our city is 2.9 square miles, so it's pretty hard to visit us. I mean, you might drive by us if you wink, but it's not so hard to drive by Orem because it's big. I assume the ratio of exchange might be affected by that. You were going to say something, I think, Andy. I'm sorry. You look like you were going to say something.
You said you did.
No, you're talking about revenue, and I actually had an idea based on what you were saying, council member. And the city has numerous trust funds. Okay. And when I say numerous, in the dozens of trust funds for a variety of different purposes. A lot of them are recreation related. Some of them are library related. Some of them are multi-purpose functional related. Okay. Some of these trust funds have $8 in them. Some of them have $8,000 in them. Okay. But I think it would behoove staff to, before we bring the budget back to you, to look at those trust funds and to see whether or not there are any documents that govern the use of their trust fund for any particular purpose, or if they're just sitting in there based on some donation that was made by numerous parties in the past for a purpose. Okay. Absent the city finding any specific documentation that says that these funds can only be used for X, Y, or Z, we may have an opportunity to use some of those recreation, library, and even the other trust funds for costs that are currently borne in the budget. Again, one-time revenue, but nonetheless, it mitigates your use of reserve for next year. So I think we can do that.
And again, it says the projected gas fund balance as of 6/30/25 is $285,000. That statement with a number attached to it appears throughout this. So somewhere those should all add up to a lot of money.
Which one are you looking at? I'm sorry.
Well, in all of these reports, it talks about it, preliminary budget, revenues and expenditures, and then it said projected gas tax fund balance as of 6/30/25, 285,000.
So
That money exists, right?
each one of those funds, the fund balances in those funds can only be used for purposes
Mhm.
designated in those funds.
But I'd like to see what they all add up to, even though they're designated. It still sounds like a big chunk of money. On a balance sheet, they'd all be identified. And there'd be a little
Add up
asterisk
to,
saying you can't.
most of
use
them are being used, they're relatively small.
Can you
funds,
borrow
A couple
against them?
100,000.
Oh,
They're being used for, they're listed. They're
Yeah.
being used for sidewalk repairs or street
Understood.
repairs or It's only a couple of items. It's not a
Oh,
laundry list
I
on
thought
a
there were
balance sheet.
several.
Sorry?
I thought there were several of these fund balances. Let's see.
There are, but with their, with
Sewer
the
fund
fund,
balance is 2.4. I know it can only be listed used for sewer. The, let's see what other fund balances are there? There's, 150,000 in the RSDP fund balance as of June 25th. And so I mean, I'm thinking balance sheet. I'm not trying to redirect the money. Like Rick, I'm learning here.
Mhm.
So-
But, you talked about earnings on interest that is significant. Where does the interest money go? Does it have to, go back into the, wherever it's earned? Or does it go into the general fund? If we make it,
Stays in the fund for which it is earned.
very good.
Yes.
So those funds should be growing by, you said 6% or whatever we're getting off.
So, I mean, you can run a trial balance on any of those funds, out of the financial system. And you're going to see where we actually sit. Keep in mind that the numbers before you in this presentation are budgeted.
Understood,
Okay, There-
understood.
there's a lot of
I
assumptions
appreciate you
going into
saying
them.
that.
But nonetheless, anything that's in those transportation funds, gas tax, RSTP, RMRA, SB1, can only be used for transportation.
And under the category of education, under expenditures for, I believe it's admin, there's a non-departmental identification of 826,000. What does non-departmental mean?
What is what?
what does non-departmental mean? So
Uh,
Not, non-departmental are things that don't fall in a single department, like for example,
Citywide.
IT. We all use IT, so it doesn't live just in finance or city manager, because every department benefits from it. That's one example, but you,
So,
you've got another one,
find
right?
out.
Okay, okay, I'm just curious.
Let me find the
just
budget.
curious.
real quick.
And then there's some pretty good numbers under the category service and supplies. And then engineering service.
So
and
here, okay,
supplies.
so in your non-departmental budget, you've got the debt service, and it's identified on this schedule. You've got the debt service for your CalPERS bonds, okay? You have to pay that every year.
Is the pension obligation bond,
So the
right?
pension obligation bonds, yes. That's 581,000 of the amount. That's
Mhm.
right out of the general fund.
Okay.
You also have the debt service for the GAP loan, which is
Umpqua Bank.
which is a loan from numerous years ago that ultimately needed to be paid back by the city. And you're nearing the end of that. I think you only have one more year after this year. 174,000 for that. And then you have the residual payment for the debt service on the fire truck lease that was paid for using fire truck mitigation fees, AB 1,600 fees, but they're exhausted. So now the general fund has to pick that cost up, and that's $4,400. Then you have some other things, upgrade computer, that's where the Tyler license. So the Tyler license, and other Tyler costs are actually in the, non-departmental. So that's 50,000 there. Computer and office equipment, this is just necessary computers. I mean, every now, you have to replace computers, you need certain things, when things break. $5,000 is a very nominal amount, but nonetheless, it's something, that's available. And then similarly, fire equipment. So fire equipment, things break, you need a tool, something comes up, that 10,000 is a nominal base amount that's built into the budget.
Thank you.
As
In my
number-
world, they'd call that miscellaneous. Just throw all the piece parts into the miscellaneous group. So, okay. And do we really have to be members of LAFCO in 3-4?
Well, funny that you should bring that up. I wouldn't describe our membership with LAFCO really a membership or required.
No,
It's required.
yeah. it's-
Yeah.
Very
don't-
But-
good.
you don't have a choice.
Yeah, we don't have a choice. Every county has a LAFCO. Every city that's incorporated in that county has to be part of LAFCO and pay a fee to support their administration and operation costs.
Very good.
3-Corps is optional, and actually 3-Corps in this budget is not included because we ran out of discretionary funds, and that was coming out of that discretionary community fund that was mentioned earlier, and now it would hit the general fund. So we did not include it for this year.
And lastly, and most creatively, the cleaning up of the mall for 12 grand. What if I said to you that the service clubs would do it for free?
I would say that we would need to come up with some sort of a contract and an agreement about that, because I'm not, we're city, we don't do things on a wink
I
and a
know, we've been
handshake.
through this
So,
before.
we would want to come up with some sort of an agreement like we have had with other partners, the school district to lease the swimming pool, for example. Something like some sort of nominal service agreement,
Just a thought.
and like work
Not
from
a lot
there.
of
If that's
money.
something, the council wants to pursue.
So in addition to seeking revenue and emphasizing revenue, creativity and problem solving is going to be required. Thank you so much. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn.
Can I go back to the mall maintenance fund for just one second? Because it looks like the majority of that cost is for PG&E water and sewer as well. So that's,
not maintenance, that's a utility.
yeah, it's the lighting for the electrical.
Okay,
So
never mind.
it's,
Yeah.
it
I
doesn't
mean, if
involve.
Rotary would like to pay those bills, certainly we can come up with an arrangement, I'm sure.
I was thinking of the Kiwanis.
Okay, another service club, okay.
Thank you, David. Mr. Hudson?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a lot of information to take in. So I had a couple of questions. One is kind of directed towards any staff that's working on something. Is there any grant funding that we're currently working on or potentially gonna be getting to help offset any of these expenditures out of the general fund?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot open right now. We were looking at possibly doing one like Fire did to get some equipment, but the USDA, they reached out to them and they're not funding
They really have no
anything
funding this year.
in their allocation. CDBG's coming up. That's a potential one. But we're gonna see things tighten up all over the place due to the federal and state budget, most likely. So as those budgets get hit and they have problems, that trickle down effect to the amount of grant money released tends to really go away. And most of that would be infrastructure project or equipment pieces. We would be able to offset some staff cost by billing our time to those grants. But obviously we'd get either equipment or a project or service out of it as well. But it's getting tougher for sure.
Okay.
The only grant that I had going, that would have alleviated a future general fund cost was, can't remember the name of it right now, but it was the community project funding through, LaMalfa's office, and we just received a denial letter for that. So
Related to a ladder truck, right?
fire engine
Fire,
too.
yeah.
So Chief, that was the most recent
Yeah.
request?
Yep.
You Denied?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
I will add too that we've got an application in for the sewer replacement part. I don't know if you guys remember that when John, it's about a $14 million application. So we're currently got our CCTV work done and we've got our list of projects that we want to do with the wastewater treatment plant. So I believe it's state revolving fund. There's a $14 million grant in for that would redo a lot of our infrastructure throughout the city. So we're expecting to hear back from that in probably July or August.
But that mostly benefits the enterprise and sewage fund.
Yeah,
the
it
general
will
fund,
all go to
so.
infrastructure costs with some offset to staff like me or Joanne paying bills doing work. So we probably would be able to pay for that, but it would, an upgrade to infrastructure is always a good thing. But
Right, it
offsetting
del-
general
it
fund,
delays
yeah.
those upkeep costs that we currently are taking on right now for a while at least. Okay. Now, CalPERS. This bond that we have right now, this is for a certain amount that was unfunded in past years. Am I thinking about
Yes,
that
it's called a
correctly?
pension obligation bond, and what the city did just the year before I started here, they basically, took all their unfunded pension liability that they had in that moment in time and bonded against it and basically paid off CalPERS, the full amount, and now we pay a bond at a lower interest rate, because at the time CalPERS interest rate was somewhere around 7%, I believe, and we got a much better deal, and Mayor Hansen was here at the time, and he could probably speak to that a little bit, but I think the annual savings is about $115,000 a year to the general fund by bonding and paying off CalPERS, and now we have a bond payment instead. But as Andy already indicated, the unfunded pension liability is going back up again because you bonded that moment in time, and now it's starting to escalate again because of some of CalPERS choices in terms of investments. And now we're at close to 100,000. Is that correct? For unfunded, and like when I first started, it was 5,000. So it's jumped in 2 years considerably. Actually, 1 year even. I think it jumped 80,000 last year.
So we're trying to pay down the snowball, but now there's another snowball building up that we're gonna have.
That
to do
is
the same
correct.
thing.
That is, yeah, that is the thing that's difficult about an unfunded pension liability.
Yeah, yes, Marty.
So then, sorry,
Yeah.
is there a way for that to become funded? I mean, is it through the general fund? Is that,
Well, the
saying
only, I
unfunded
mean,
Means there's no money for it, right? And I
Yep.
understand we don't have the money for it. I'm talking for future, hopefully. Is there a way to avoid from us having to?
Well, all
Support
classic
these.
helpers employees could go away. That's one, that's one way, because it's classic helpers employees that are the bulk of the unfunded pension liability. It's not that, which, former Governor Jerry Brown changed in 2012, the CalPERS system and the pension retirement because of this issue. And so as, classic CalPERS employees retire and, go away. Yeah, I didn't want to say die, but it is a joke among city managers that they all have to
It
die.
should
But
get a
anyways,
Expired.
yeah, yes, thank you, expire, that, that it will go away because the PEPRA employees, the new employees since 2012 are not created, those are being paid as they go. Very little is
Yeah.
unfunded.
Very little, however, an unfunded liability does exist for all PEPRA plans. Because every year CalPERS does
There's
not
no way
meet,
to
does
avoid
not
it.
meet the assumptions built into their actuarial report, one of which includes meeting the discount rate, their investment rate
Mhm.
of 6.8%. You will accrue an unfunded liability in that. fund.
And at the Municipal Finance Institute that Joanne, myself, and Andy went to in December, CalPERS did a presentation, and they talked about some of their investments. One of them was related to climate change. And they lost a lot of money last year, and yet this year, I think weren't they gonna invest about $1 billion
They're
in climate change
Tripling
related?
down.
So even though they lost money last year, so unfortunately, the CalPERS board and CalPERS actions have become very political rather than just treating it as a retirement fund and doing the best by the cities and the best by the employees. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but both Andy and I have a little, it's a little bit of a thorn in our side.
Okay. Another question that I had is when I looked through the documents that you gave us, the other half of this, I calculated about 380,000 in professional services between the different departments and everything else. What is that entailing? You said Tyler was part of the non-departmental fund. So, I mean, under finance, under library, we have 110,000. Under finance, there's 80,000, or there's 50,000.
So the contractors that we have
Contractors, that's-
ongoing professional services include Andy, as you know, our city engineer, our building inspector, our city planner. And the library director is a City of Orland employee, of which we pay about a half of her salary, so that it shows up in the budget as a contract position because she's not a City of Willows employee. So those are the main long-term contracts that the city has right now, as well as, of course, we contract for wastewater treatment, management, as well, but that's a contract with Inframark, so it doesn't show up as like an individual, the way those, other individuals listed. Sorry?
In the sewer.
It's in the sewer fund, but yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's the bulk of our, and then there's IT as a contract that might be under professional services. Those are the ones that I can, think of off the top of my head, unless you want to go through each department.
No, like I said, I was just curious as to why there were so many different professional services charges, Like I said, on the library, if it's paid because we pay that to the county, is that how you said that was?
No,
On people?
No, Jody is a City of Orland employee, so it's paid to the City of Orland.
Okay, and that's under the contract. So then the
Correct.
other salaries and part-time salaries, those are the other employees that are in there? Is that how that's coming
If
up?
they would show under salaries, permanent
Right.
employees are in salaries
Right.
and professional contractors are in
Under
professional
contract
services
I got
or contract services also. We also have the auditors listed in the finance department, but I believe that's under contract services. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. Andy and I were just discussing, though, that we can bring back at the final budget a list of what all of those contracts are, so you can actually see literally what contractors are in each line item in those departments.
And then, my last question was on the engineering page. Professional services goes from 75,000 this year to 140,000 next year. Is there a reason why it's almost doubling?
Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, so we, the engineering line, we kind of had Coastland in some of our building department for plan check review. So what we've done is we've moved the plan check review and all of Coastland's engineering services into that engineering line and removed some of it from building. So again, professional services too, sometimes as the expense goes up, sometimes the revenue will match that. So those are sometimes reimbursable costs too that we would get from an applicant. Say somebody comes in and does a plan check for $8,000. We're going to expense that $8,000, but we're also going to take in $8,000 of revenue for them. So it covers John's services to the city and then building plans check, which would be almost always a reimbursable from the applicant itself. So we got that kind of just more streamlined and put all of John's services into that engineering department and cleared it from building.
Okay, and then last night when we were discussing with the building inspector, you mentioned a fee schedule that you guys are working on as part of our new master fee schedule. Will that offset, how much of his costs will that offset if we're able to implement that?
So that would be included in the building permit fee price. You're talking about the new master fee schedule we're working on?
Well, in the municipal code,
And-
right?
Yeah.
Oh, both
and
of
where
them.
He's able to, you know, instead of just fire being the only ones that are able. to
Oh,
fine.
for issue citations and stuff, that would be, I would say, an unknown on my end at this point, until we really get in and see, and it would vary year to year depending on the violations and things
Right.
that come about. And so he is budgeted under the professional services of the building department.
Right.
But what we'll do is we'll have revenue accounts that we'll be able to specifically track those things for the code violations. So that way we can run a report, and see exactly what that is to help us budget for that offset in the future.
But we don't typically take master fees that come in and earmark them for specific contracts or earmark them for specific employees. It goes into the general fund, unless it's sewage, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, you just do your budget every year, right?
No, and I
So,
understand that. I
yeah.
just didn't know how much that, if there was an idea of what that would bring. as far
Once
as
we get into
offset.
place, and like I said, year to year, you get a 3-year average going, you can kind of really budget on
But
expected.
Joe, just, to highlight the master fee schedule, there are some fees that are severely and have been below
Oh,
market. I mean,
absolutely.
when we bring that back to the council, I was pretty surprised to see, unfortunately, how much we have not, we've sort of left on the table,
Yeah.
if you will, because they are very, very below. Some of them are really surprising.
When you have contractors say, wow, that's it, or man, you need to raise that. you kinda
Yeah,
know that you-
contractors telling you
Yeah,
you
it's
need
been
to
a while.
raise your fees because
So, and the good thing is we're going to build in, an annual review of it, update it. We
with
can
a
do
CPI, built-in
increase,
CPI.
So that way it kind of doesn't need to be drastically updated in spurts where we're losing money and then giving the consumer a big hit.
And then you mentioned drawing from our enterprise funds to carry us through and hopefully pay back the general fund. You said that's not a good decision. Why would that be if we're circling the drain and coming to an end as a incorporated city? Why would that not be a good decision to keep us afloat a little bit longer?
Well, no, to basically borrow against, borrow against the enterprise fund and then pay it back later. Why is that not a great?
Because ultimately you're gonna have to pay it back. And anytime you borrow money, when you are in a deficit situation systemically on an ongoing basis, the first question that's gonna be asked is, what's your plan to pay it back? And if your plan is a hypothetical plan based on some future event that has yet to occur, it's probably not the best thing to borrow from other funds. Because ultimately, if that fails, you're still gonna owe that money. And
The-
now you're in a worse situation.
Well, the other thing I would mention too is that enterprise funds, they're highly regulated. I mean, they're watched on how they're spent and what you're doing with them or not doing that with them by the state. And so, it's not like just taking a loan out against property that you already own. For example, if we did something like that, and that's a different thing because it's all general fund related. This is a fee-based enterprise fund. And it also includes, we contract with Northeast Willows. So it includes an entity that is not a City of Willows residents and inside. So it gets really kind of sticky if you start taking loans against enterprise funds.
So based on what city manager just said, you could hypothetically do what's called a COP, a certificate of participation. That's basically a loan. It's a leaseback loan on city-owned property. So you're basically borrowing against your property. And the collateral, that's basically held by the bank is the property itself. So if you don't pay that back,
Right,
they take the property.
like a regular loan.
And that's all going to come back to you for further consideration and discussion later this summer.
So that is in the works then of.
Yes,
of
it is.
possibly doing
Yes,
that.
we
Okay.
just didn't want to mix it with this conversation.
No, that's fine.
Yep.
And this conversation just brought it up in my head, so I figured I'd ask. the
Totally
question to
understand.
Understand the pros and cons of why not. That's all I have. Thank you.
Let's take a very short recess at this time, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes or less.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ready, here we go, here we go. Everybody, here we go.
Sam granddaughter's graduating.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I
It's
asked him if he did it with
3:46
family
PM
or
and
not.
we're reconvening at the
My
open
buddy,
session
he does.
from a short recess.
You're my.
So,
boy.
thank
Yeah,
you,
Alex, too. You're my
uh,
boy.
Mr. Hudson, did you have any more comments, Evan?
No, I was done.
Okay, very good, very good. Mr. Sprague?
Yes, there's certainly an advantage of being last to be able to ask questions because so many of mine already got answered. You good people already have. So I do have a couple. Andy, I probably have asked you this before and I'm probably repeating myself and I don't remember what your answer was. So I'm going to ask it again. The budget you provided us on your slideshow, page number 11, and showing the years from 1920 clear up to 2027 or 27, 28. Are those figures based on actually having the sales tax increase go
No.
through?
No.
That's without.
That's right.
So if we do have it, then everything gets, I think the projections on that 1.5 cents was about $2 million, a little over 2 million.
So yeah, we can build that in. So that's actually a good point. And be happy to show that, when we bring back the final budget, show you what if
What if?
scenario. Yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah.
would be very important, I think,
Okay.
very,
Yeah.
could be potentially very encouraging. The other thing, what I noticed here, okay, so based on the sales tax not going in, that's what your graphs show here, not going in. It appears then, if I understand this correctly, the fiscal year 25, 26, you say you've got 18% in a negative number. The following year, you've got 38%. What does that actually reflect? That
So
actually
that's just the-
reflects the reserve being gone plus.
Correct.
Is that
Well,
correct?
actually, the percentage represents a percentage of expenditures. So most cities don't have a fund balance that ever gets in the red. Okay, so what I like to show on that graph is actually how much of your reserves are represent your total expenditure base. And for example, GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers of America, recommends that you have 2 months of reserve set aside at a minimum. Okay, and that's low. So that represents about 17%.
17.
Okay, so you're looking for that number to be at least 17% just to comply with GFOA's recommendation. But typically cities your size would have anywhere between 30 and 50.
Okay, so if
Okay.
you use the 17% with this 18%, the actual then is probably 35%.
Well, the actual is on there. So
Is it?
So-
Okay.
so if you go back, if you're looking at that slide, oh, you're there. Okay. So on this particular slide, you can see that at one point in time, you had 29, 44, and 47% of your expenditure base in reserves. Okay, that's a good number to work with, assuming you have continuing, budget surpluses or a fluid, systemic, budget where you're adding back money every year or at least breaking even.
Okay. All right.
Now in 22, 23, you drop down to 28%. Okay, so you burn some money there. So now your expenditure base is only 28% covered by reserves. Then you drop to 15% as estimated for the current year. So right now you're teetering on that threshold of, the GFOA requirement. There's no magic to that GFOA requirement. They just meant, they'd say 2 months is a good number. At the end of next year, you only have 3%.
Right.
Okay, so those are dangerously low. numbers. And the negative numbers just represent negative that much in expenditures.
All right, thank you. So going back then to your slide number 8, if I understood it correctly, and you actually said it here, the big 3 revenue sources, property tax, sales tax, and transit occupancy tax, TOT tax, make up 77% of our general fund.
77% of all your general fund revenues as a whole
Okay.
come from three
Not,
sources.
not the total revenue taking into consideration our enterprise funds and any other sources either, just general fund.
That's just general fund.
Okay.
yes.
And that's all, these funds go into the general fund specific.
Correct. So you
Correct.
don't get sales tax in any fund but the general fund. You don't get TOT in any fund but the general fund. You don't get property tax in any fund but the general.
Well, it becomes immediately obvious to me that with property tax, we have to have housing. And I look at sales tax, we have to have some other sources of revenue, retail type sales, and then obviously the TOT tax. Under the TOT tax, I know what was it, Baymont was closed down for about a year and a half, so we did not receive any money from that whatsoever.
They were
They
closed.
did open up again now as Quality Inn. Have we been able to look at that and see if they've generated how much?
Yeah, the trends that I'm using are based on the current collections to date. So what I'm looking for when I go through your general ledger is I'm looking for, I think you have 6 hotels, okay? 6 motels. I'm looking for 6 payments every quarter, and they're there for the most part. I mean, some are late, but they're there. And I'm looking at how much they're being paid each quarter. And then I'm going back the previous year and I'm trying to extrapolate how much I believe will be collected for that quarter that remains to be collected in the current year. So it's just that type of analysis that's done to determine how much TOT, we're projecting. Right now, TOT is lower, and probably because of what you just said, something being closed, one of the places being closed for a couple of years. So hopefully, all things being equal, if they're back open, they're adding more to your TOT base as opposed to taking from another hotel and just equalizing things that way. So you need new customers. You need new customers to add to your TOT base. You need new customers to buy things in your city to increase your sales tax. And you need new homes or higher home values to increase your property tax above the CPI.
I'm gonna steal that. You need new customers. May I steal that from you?
I didn't hear one.
We also steal that you need new customers.
You need new
Please.
customers.
I can steal
Yeah,
that.
you need new
Steal
customers.
it from-
Need new customers. Putting that down, okay. All right, so going back to a couple of the other things that you brought up during your discussion and whatnot, you talked about trust funds, but what rung in my ear is I know that we've got $1,400,000 in our development impact fee accounts. Now, those are normally earmarked specifically for a particular project and you can't take from them or so. But has staff, and this is probably a question for Joe, have you looked at those development impact fees and see where we could in fact spend them legitimately by the requirements or the regulations that we have? I will use one specifically. I think we've got $385,000 in the whatever the I-5 exchange, corridor exchange is. I don't know what are the parameters, what are the flexibilities that we have with that funding? And the reason I'm asking, is most people know that I'm focusing on with a couple of the other gentlemen in regard to what we can do with Road 57 or down there. Is there any avenue through those development impact fees for the quote unquote I-5 interchange or whatever, to be able to use that for some sort of monumentation, either at Wood Street, the 162 exit or the 52 or 57 exit? And added to that, is there any flexibility then to be able to use some of those funds for doing some degree of beautification on Road 57 or on 99 from 57 up to the canal?
Yeah, so with development impact fees, I think we required to do a Nexus study that we're probably out of date with. So I think we need to update that. And as I understand it, I'm not an expert with the development impact fees, but John, our city engineer at Coastland, was working on getting those updated. We've got certain projects that are earmarked, right? They're very specific in nature. I'm not sure what those are for the I-5 feasibility or for the I-5 impact fees. But normally it would be to support new growth, right? So if we used our library impact fees and bought additional, a building or something like that, or something that we'd mentioned in there, it would be it would need to be based on the ability that we have grown, that these impact fees, new houses have been built and our population's grown. So therefore these services are needed. Not saying that we can't use them, but I need to do a little more research on it. But the fact that our population is not growing at this point, even though we've collected those fees, that might present a problem on justification for using it. But I can definitely get back to you after I do a little more research
We-
and see what those funds are.
We actually already, we did do some research. Sorry, Joe.
No, you're fine.
We did, because Joe's correct that the impact fees are intended for when there's growth in the city. However, we haven't had much growth, as I think everyone knows, for some time. We have done an initial legal analysis on whether we could use, for example, the I-5 interchange funds for something around Road 57 exit. And we think we can. We've only had a preliminary conversation with the city engineer and the former city attorney. So we would need to revive that conversation and discuss it and get a legal opinion from our current city attorney. But the city engineer did think it would be possible. There's nothing left to do, obviously, at the main 162 exit, but the only other exit in the city is Road 57, and we think that we could do something. We have done some initial, like I said, preliminary analysis of some of the other funds. We've looked at the Recreation Impact Fee Fund. There is actually one of the items that's listed in the Nexus study that's from 2008, I believe, includes lighting in one of our parks. And we've looked at the possibility of moving forward with doing that because we need lighting, and we could, it's very explicit in the impact in the Nexus study. And so we could do that. We do need to update our Nexus study. However, that's not going to change how we spend the current funds. You can't spend current monies we've already collected on a new Nexus study. You have to, we've already got that legal opinion. You have to spend it on whatever is in the 2008 Nexus study.
Well, and I do know, and my concern is I know that there's an annual requirement of reporting that type of, and 5-year reports, and we've never done those until the most recently. I think we've done 2 or 3 of those. But I do know that those reports obviously are the process whereby those are collected do have in fact a timeline of when they have to be expended on the project that they were collected for, or if not, then they theoretically return back to the people that collected those, specifically the home buyers and so on. So I would encourage us then to be able to take a look at that and see, again, it's 1.5 or $1.4 million on my last calculation. Some of it, I think it's, what is it, $79 or $79,000 for the library. Various funds, I think there's 138,000 in the street fund, whatever that is. So to be able to look at those and see how we can use those funds, they're just sitting there. They collect interest and the interest stays within the kitty. But nevertheless, we could be putting those to work. You brought up I think you did, Andy, in reference to discussion about the GAP loan. How much is that GAP loan, and what project or what project was that for?
I can't remember what the original amount of the loan was.
Oh, yeah. So the original loan was with Umpqua. It was for approximately, I think, a little over $500,000. And it was intended to, and I think Mayor Hansen can also speak to this. It was intended to provide the city with some additional cash flow when it was applying for the EDA grant, which was all total about $3.7 million to help the facilitate the Rumiano cheese project and that cul-de-sac and all the work that needed to be done down there for the culvert and sewage and storm drain, all of that, and the new road and the bridge was funded by the EDA grant. And in providing that funding, the federal government takes forever. It's a reimbursement grant. They take forever to reimburse. When I got here, the project had already been done a year and we were still waiting for our last issuance of a reimbursement check of about $500,000. And so the city took out a loan, basically what we called a GAP loan, to cover the cost of cash flow for the city for, paying our bills and paying salaries.
Okay, so when
So
the
that was until the reimbursement came in from the E EDA.
so when the Fed's money comes in, that gets retired? Is that what I'm understanding?
But ultimately, the full amount of the gap loan was not recovered from grants. That was the issue.
Correct.
Projects, and the project that comes to my mind is Basin Street.
Right, well,
uh,
that's
was-
Rumiana
was
Cheese,
one of
that's
the-
Basin
one of
Street.
the
Yeah,
projects.
right, that's correct.
And there were numerous also CDBG grants going on at the same time, for projects, that were funded partially, by those grants. The gap loan was, as the city manager indicated, put in place to prevent the city from dipping into, well, negative cash. Basically. So you had cash to operate with as you made expenditures for these projects, that ultimately would be partially reimbursed by grants. The full amount of the gap loan was never recovered. All those grants have been closed out, and yet the city still had debt associated with the gap loan. So that's why the general fund is on the hook.
And there, and in fairness, Councilmember Sprague, there were cost overruns with that project. And in large part, those were due to some of the really very serious challenges we had dealing with PG&E. There were lots of change orders on the plans. And, the city engineer can speak volumes on what happened and the amount of back and forth with PG&E that occurred as a result of that Basin Street project. So there ended up being some cost overruns as a result of that.
So let me conclude then with this one, then I'm assuming the gap loan is something that is going to be a debt carry forward for the city until which time, right?
I think
And the
the-
I
Rumiana
think this year is
Cheese
the last year.
Through next year.
I think-
Through 2020, 24, 25, and then a little bit of 25, 26, yeah.
before it's gone.
Correct.
But the payment for that, is it coming out of our general fund or is
Correct.
It is.
that's coming directly out of our general fund?
That is correct.
And that's not reimbursable by the developer or the grants or anybody else?
All
So
of
the
those grants have
cost
been closed out.
overruns- Pardon me?
All of those grants have already been closed
Certainly-
out.
Certainly
So-
not the grants, but you bring up a good point, okay? Because you talk about the AB 1600, the development impact fees, just a little bit ago. But the question becomes, did the projects that were funded by that gap loan, did they increase a level of service, in the city, or, enhance the city in some way to provide a different level of service where they may be covered by AB 1600 fees, if possible. So that is a very
Interesting
valid
question.
question.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
You understood where I was headed with that whole thing. One of the things this discussion separated for me was I wanted to isolate that gap loan between what we know to be the South Street project. Back in 98, 96, 98, the South project was put in down south of town. At that time, I was working for the state senator and that particular process went a little bit upside down. And I remember being contacted by then city manager Mike Minstrel, if I'm not mistaken. at that
Russ
time.
Melquist, wasn't it Russ?
And we were able to convince HUD, I think was the overseeing state agency on that. And I don't remember the dollar amounts that were lent for that cul-de-sac and so on, but usually those kinds of loans or grants are job created. $35,000 for every job and
Correct.
that type of thing, or whatever the matrix is now. I've got no idea. The point I'm getting at is that's a project that sits there idle. It's a cul-de-sac. It's in there. There's opportunity from my perspective. People complain that nobody can contact the realtor, even though if there's a potential buyer and so on and so forth. The point I'm getting at there is I know that the city probably either gap loans or grants or however we did it back 25, almost 30 years ago now. What is the city's position on that particular project for being able to help facilitate moving something forward? Or do we have any equity position into that property
In the
at all?
Basin Street,
No. The South project down on Road 57. It's a South of cul-de-sac by the 57, Chevron station.
Where the Chevron.
Swift is, where the Swift is and
Chevron-
Chevron.
Swift, It's
Swift
Chevron
Trucking is
taking
what
this
it was
way.
identified as, Swift Trucking.
Sue
There-
Soth has had those properties listed for forever,
Right.
What-
I'm,
allegedly for sale.
The only
Yeah.
two HUD had related CDBG and or home loans that the city has where ultimately there is some repayment due, one of which is being repaid back right now. Is for Rumiano Cheese Company.
Okay.
Okay, and the other one is for the Sycamore Street Apartments, I think. is what it's
Sycamore Apartments,
Okay,
yeah.
Sycamore Apartments. Rumiano, Sycamore is deferred. Okay, so there's no money coming in for that right now. Okay, ultimately, there may be, but that loan is set up differently from Rumiano. Rumiano's loan is, I want to say it's a multi-million-dollar loan. Okay. Ultimately, the loan proceeds that come back into the city, which are being paid right now, I think you received 90 some odd $1,000 last year, and that particular fund budget will be one of the funds you'll see when I bring the budget back to you in June.
Okay.
That money, that can be reloaned out. Okay, but to reloan, and it can only be reloaned out, or it has to be returned to the state. Okay, and there are timelines and provisions for doing that. One of the provisions for reloaning that money out is that you have what's called a reuse plan in place. Okay, you need a program income reuse plan in place that states specifically how you are able to reuse that money to provide loans to other businesses and such. So I'm not sure if the city has an active reuse plan or not.
we do not.
But nonetheless, if you did have one, you could set up a program to spur economic development using the money that's being paid back from Rumiano.
Okay, from the Rumiano, but I'm specifically talking about the cul-de-sac down there. There's a name on it. What's the cul-de-sac called? South Court?
It was Swift Trucking when Russ Melquist was doing it, and Gary can speak to this.
North Court, South.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't have anything to do with it. It's privately owned property and there's no loans or grant. There's nothing tying the city
Nothing
financially.
carried forward from
No.
that. Okay, thank you. When we brought up ARPA, I think the number was $627,000 that went for that water line from Rumiano Cheese down to Road 57 and all of that. And I was not on the council at that time, but I did appeal to the council at that, when that was going through and they were approving that. I made the suggestion that we, as opposed to it being an outright gift of public funds, that we develop some sort of mechanism for recovery of those funds if those properties sold, that we're able to benefit from the fact that that water went in. I didn't follow up with anybody on that, but do we know that mechanism, that instrument, the real estate law instrument was ever put into place, that it gives us the ability to recapture that ARPA? I know that it's speculative of when, if and whenever something develops further down there, but I'm just curious on looking forward to balancing our budget and getting well into the black in there. Can we anticipate some sort of ability to recover that ARPA money?
So the council did, when the project was approved at the request of former council member Hoffenke, and the city engineer did a presentation on this briefly about what's called an area of benefit.
Right.
And so that was approved as a contingent of approving the project for the water main connection.
Correct.
And because it's an ordinance and it would have to be added to the municipal code, and we're doing a complete overhaul of our code, we added that to the project of overhauling the code, which another branch of Prentice Long, as you may recall, is actually working on that project. So that will be coming forward to the council with the entire overhaul of the municipal code at a future date.
Okay, so that then is the first domino that needs to fall to create the instrument that I.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. DOT I asked about. I had several questions on some of the line items, but given the time on this, I think I'll save those and maybe give them to you and to your city manager in writing, and we can respond to those in the next meeting. I suppose it's already, we're gone beyond 2 hours already. So in the interest of time, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Sprague. I'm intimately familiar with this budget, been, was first elected council in 2008, so I really have no questions. As Rick said, there's no fat in this budget, period. Last year, I had a wish list. Among them were engine 2 replacement for the fire department and completion of the water main extension with the ARPA funds. That, thank God, was done, and we're out of the water business. This year, there is no wish list. I just hope and pray that the city of Willows is able to continue as an incorporated city. With that, it's been mentioned today, it's dependent on the passage of the sales tax measure in November, hopeful passage. Without that, our financial future is extremely dark here. It's been good discussion, a lot of good questions from my colleagues here, a lot of good interaction. And Andy, thank you very much for all of your information. I can't thank enough for all of your help here the past several years. We're so fortunate to have you on board and working with our fine team here and with your analysis. Like I say, it's a dire budget. It's a dire budget. We're just trying to survive here and keep our heads above water. Mr. Sprague, in reference to, your initial questions about the gap loan, it's been answered by Marty and Andy, but as stated, those were funds while awaiting reimbursement from EDA. There was some complicated financing going on there. Basin Street and Rumiana Keys have been outstanding and viable partners with that project, and also assumed loans and payments on different aspects of it. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot to it. And development impact fees were also utilized for parts of that project as well. So there's a lot of prongs, a lot of moving parts as that project moved forward. And so I just wanted to point that out. I don't know any history about the on South 57 and 99. The South development was long before I ever came on the city council. So I don't.
Now, my recollection, there were some difficulties that they had at that time. We were able to interject. I think we were instrumental, with the senator's office being instrumental in getting some sort of a 6-month or a 12-month reprieve. Maybe that satisfied whatever the problem was. I don't know, but it just, every time I go down there and I look at that, I'm golly, why don't we have a Wendy's and an In-N-Out burger or fill in the blank?
Well, that property has been listed allegedly by Sioux South for many years. And I know for a fact, several different individuals have inquired about purchasing it and no go.
Yeah.
So there you go. I have no, I don't know.
And that's what I was
don't
asking.
have an answer for
if
you.
we had any dog in that fight as some sort of a participating, whatever we may have done 25 years ago, but apparently not.
It'd be nice if that property could actually be sold. It's supposedly listed for sale, but I don't believe it. I don't understand what's going on there, but anyway. Yeah, and it was mentioned, like I say, excellent questions. Yeah. The county of Glenn is paying a little bit more money, as Jody so nobly pointed out, for library services, not much more. They have not been a very good partner. Absolutely not, as related to the financial responsibility for library services. And we have a fantastic library. Thank you, Jody, for everything that you and your team do. But it's a crying shame, and we need to keep working at that and increase those fundings and have the county pay for their fair share of operations. It's the right thing to do. In reference to the TOT, the audit, the one-time audit, I know there's still an outstanding TOT position. We had an appeal hearing right here in this chambers several years ago
Oh, yeah,
involving one property owned by Gary Evans.
correct.
I don't believe that individual has ever paid his TOT,
No.
ever.
No.
So an audit will identify that. So once that's identified, do we have any teeth in collection? That's my question.
No, I believe what the council, my recollection is the council authorized moving forward with a lien on the property, which is the only option. However, that happened at a time when we were transitioning city attorneys.
Mhm, right,
So I believe that that lien, I'm almost positive that that did not happen.
right. It did not happen.
Right.
It did not
So-
happen.
So as far as I know, that's the only option is a lien on the property to get TOT. Do you know of anything else to get somebody to pay their, I mean, I suppose we could make our municipal code have more teeth somehow, but I don't know. No,
To the extent you can do a lien, I would definitely recommend that. Because at some point in time, that property will be sold,
Mhm.
and that will come due.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any way to adjudicate it, with the court system or.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those are TOT monies that are rightfully owed to the city of Willows and we
Correct.
receive nothing. And that cannot be ignored, but I just want to, want to point that out. Not that that's going to save our budget issues.
Oh,
But,
right.
just a thought on that. In reference to the, Evan was asking a question about the POB, the pension obligation bond sales. The number escapes me, the savings to that bond sale was huge. Andy, I don't remember the exact numbers.
I don't remember the life of it, but it's about $115,000 a year. I saw
wanna
that at
say-
one
I
point.
want to say 1.9.
But the life of the bond is much bigger than that,
One
obviously.
point nine million or
Yeah.
something like
Mhm.
that. That's what we saved, when we eliminated that, wiped that slate of our unfunded liabilities out. And then then that resets at that time, and then they start building again. But, with the pepper changes, I mean, that has helped us financially, a big time. But Marty, $100,000 is now the unfunded liability. Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, it's around 100,000, isn't it, the unfunded? But that jumped from, when I looked at it as soon as I got here, it was like $3,000. That's 2.5 years ago. It's jumped to close to 100,000 in 2 years.
Yeah,
we refinanced
the debt, so now it's just building.
Well, no, it's just the new unfunded pension liability.
Right.
It has, has nothing to do with the pension obligation bond. That's already done and sold, but it's just, because of, again, going CalPERS investments and their investment choices in large part have had a tremendous adverse impact on the unfunded pension liability for everybody. Every city is
Absolutely.
feeling it,
The CalPERS board is mismanaging the funds.
I think out of the,
it's very political.
out of the last 9 years, and I'm thinking, I have a slide on this, and I'm sorry I didn't include it today, but I've used it. Out of the last 9 years, I think CalPERS has made or exceeded their discount rate 3 times.
Mhm.
Okay, so every time it does not meet or exceed its discount rate, then it's not meeting its actuarial assumption, to basically pay off that funded liability, that unfunded liability. It's adding to it. Okay, so now when they exceed it or they beat it, then it should reduce that liability. But 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, CalPERS made 21%, which was 14% more than their discount rate at the time. They used the majority of that huge influx of funds they received on their investment portfolio because the markets just went crazy right after COVID, okay, or even during COVID. And they lowered the discount rate. Okay, so instead of having to earn 7%, they said, no, we're going to lower the discount rate to 6.8. And what that did was it artificially increased on the other end everybody's unfunded liability, because now you're not making your assumption is that they took a lot of that savings to lower the discount rate, keep all things equal. So that 14% added money did not come back to the cities the way it should have. Okay, because by policy, CalPERS has a huge return, they're going to lower the discount rate so that in the future, the cities don't have to rely on CalPERS earning a higher rate, but something lower than 6.8 instead of 7.
Do we have options outside of just dealing with CalPERS?
I'm sorry?
Is there options outside of dealing with CalPERS, or because we're a government
Oh,
entity,
sure,
we
there's
have to do-
options, but you'd have to buy out
You have
and
to
pay
buy out
for
CalPERS.
everything. You got to buy out of it, basically.
And you don't buy out for your unfunded liability. you buy out for a significantly discounted unfunded liability, which means, doesn't sound like it sounds. It means that instead of assuming 6.8%, they're going to assume like 1.5%. So
So to
your
buy 'em out
unfunded
as
liability
millions and
is
millions of
that much more.
dollars.
They want to make sure that they make sure.
They don't want you to buy
that
out.
They have enough money to pay everybody off.
And they don't want you to buy out. That is correct. No.
Exactly. It's
Like the
stack-
Williamson Act.
The deck is stacked against.
Multiple of
municipalities.
millions.
Mhm.
Now, we looked
And
at-
who
we looked
pays
at
when they
some-
don't meet their goal, Andy?
What's that?
When CalPERS doesn't meet their goal?
Employers.
We do, yes.
Employers, only employers.
You know, yeah, we're on the hook. Right.
If
So,
I
you know-
recall, during that time you were talking about, they gave the staff a substantial increase in their salaries down there at the same time and expanded their building. You might know more about that than I do, but
Here at the City of Willows?
no.
CalPERS.
Oh,
CalPERS,
CalPERS. Oh,
CalPERS.
gave their own employees a
Yeah.
substantial? Well, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. The point is that they were bragging on the 1 year of good investment that they had, a good return. So everybody got a salary increase for that. And our good employees end up picking up the tab.
Mhm.
So the weatherman was right one time. Pardon me?
The weatherman was right one time.
Right.
That is correct.
Well, that's, unfortunately, I know way more than I want to know about CalPERS and their mismanagement. It's terrible. And they can mismanage all they want because it comes on back to the municipalities and we pay for it. It's not right in their investment practices, their job should be to earn the highest interest rates they can to support the pension funds. They're not doing that. It's a crying shame, but anyway, with that, the only final thought I had was as I think you all know, I think the world of the entire city team of employees. I think each and every one of you for what you do each and every day, day in, day out. You have difficult jobs and oftentimes take unwarranted cheap shots, but sometimes, as we know, that comes with working for a government agency. So I just want to make sure that you know that I appreciate each and every one of you and what you all do every day, that you're in your various roles. The city of Willows, for the citizens, you do outstanding work, and I'm so honored to play such a minor role in such a great organization here in the city of Willows. We have serious budget issues. It's dependent on what happens in November moving forward. And with that, I'm not in support of moving forward with any staff changes. I'm talking finance. So Andy, you were walking through the finance. We recently approved a salary schedule and for a finance director position. Okay. And Joanne, in your role, I thank God you're here. You're doing outstanding work. Thank you for everything that you do every day. Okay. And as you indicated, our finance department since 2020 has been like this. It's been a roller coaster. We haven't had one. We had sort of one. We haven't had one, and back and forth. And finally we have Joanne and Robin here. Hi, Robin. Thank you for being here. Here on staff to even things out. I'm not in favor of moving forward with any personnel changes until we see what happens in November. I just wanted to state my thoughts on that right now. I don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to maintain the status quo and hopefully things will change, and then we'll have some definite redirection to the city, and we'll see some positive results. And I mean, this working with such a skeleton crew for so many years. I mean, how many years has it been now? Way too many.
It's a long
Year
time.
after year after year. I want to say 2010, Matisa? Was it about right, I'm thinking? Was it that long ago? Was it that long? Yeah, 2008, 2009. And it's just, it's just, and it's, you say it's a revenue issue, right? It's a revenue issue. We don't have a spending problem. We have a revenue issue, and that needs to be corrected. But anyway, I think positive and move forward, and hopefully we can continue as a city delivering the efficient, effective city services that our citizens deserve moving forward. But I just wanted to state my case on that. My opinions are in no way with any concern in reference to the performance of any staff members or the finance department or anything. I'm so happy that we have Joanne and Robin on staff doing what they're doing every day here. So I just wanted to say that while I was thinking about it, and want to forget to say that. So other than that, I have no further questions. If council members have no further questions or comments, we've got our fabulous team of employees here. Do you have any questions, comments, anybody? If so, feel free. Anything? No, nothing? No? Thank-
If I could, Mary Anson, I'd like to, in light of that conversation, and I don't know if the rest of the council has other comments, but I think this is a good time to just mention that, sort of the next steps from here on out. Currently, we do not have another meeting scheduled until the end of June. And that would be the time to approve the budget at that time. Also, Andy's not available on the 25th and would like to be able to do this same meeting on a Wednesday on the 26th of June, if possible. As you know, we need to have an approved budget by June 30th. I don't have another budget meeting or workshop planned unless the council wants one, which would be June 11th or another special meeting. So I would like feedback on that. You had a number of questions. You had a comment about what's in the budget that you'd like to see changed. I don't know if the council wants another opportunity to get answers to some of these questions and discuss it further before the night or the day that you actually approve the budget. I'd like some direction on that if that's something you want, or if you want answers to all these different questions you had and just sent to you and emailed to you and doing back and forth individually. I need a little bit of feedback on that. And then, only one person has spoken about one change in the budget at this point. So it would be helpful to hear, especially on that topic or any other ones from the rest of the council. I mean,
Yeah, thank you,
there's
Marty.
5 of you. So,
you, Marty.
yeah.
Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Well, I had some questions about how to understand it. I don't know, questions about funding from the county for the library. That's something that needs to work on, whether that's going to happen anytime soon or not. So
Correct.
I'm comfortable with, meeting on the 26th of June.
Okay.
26th of June.
Gentlemen?
Any questions I have, I mean, I'll email you if I have any other questions, but as of now, I think I've pretty much asked anything that I have to ask, so. I think I can
And
move
you want
forward.
the finance position restructuring removed from the budget?
I didn't think it was in there.
It-
55.
Transitioning the position, the finance director position.
No, that was just
That's in your
adding
budget, isn't it?
Right now,
full-time.
Yeah, it is in the budget right now. Yes,
It is.
correct. Yep.
That was part of that.
That was the 55,000 of,
Well, it's part of it.
part of
That's
it.
not,
That's
that's
the
not
whole
all of
thing,
it.
right?
No.
Yeah.
It's not that kind. I'm sure
It's not,
Joanne would love it if it was that, but it's not that's all that by any stretch.
I'm gonna guess the fully loaded amount, is like, and this still assumes that I continue to, not do as much in the future, okay? Because keep in mind, I took some out of professional services, as part of that proposal
Mhm.
for the budget. But I want to say the fully loaded change would be probably between $25,000 and $30,000.
More,
Less,
less.
yeah.
So just these are the numbers that I was asked to get. So
that- But that's keep in mind, less too.
that's using you less, your services.
Right.
that's using your services less.
Correct.
With this proposal,
Andy, are you
which
telling us you
includes
don't
the
wanna be here anymore?
transition. Sorry?
Yeah.
Are you telling us you don't want to be here anymore? Slowly stepping
No,
away
I didn't
from
say that.
us.
No,
You wouldn't mind being a little less.
you
I
heard my
think, though.
diatribe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He'd miss us. Look at that. Look
Yeah.
at that.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Well, because I'm confused, because I originally asked that's the 18 funded positions. And the salary direct, the one that we just, for the finance director, the job description salary was unfilled.
Correct.
And when it ultimately does get filled, it would be cost savings or equal to what our current costs are. But I didn't know that that was actually built in here, because I thought the 55,000 was just a full two-person staff
It is a full two-person staff with that transition
with
included.
that transition.
Correct.
Not recognized.
Yes. Yeah. So, so yeah, so that's why I'm asking for additional input from the council, because that's what Mayor Hansen was just recommending or suggesting is a change from the budget that was just presented to you. So I was also asked by Councilmember Bodden to give some sense of the cost and that we this past year and any potential savings. So to date, we've spent $69,214 on Andy Heath Financial Services. There will be another invoice before June 30th, so that will be over $70,000. And of that, approximately 27,000 has been spent on the mid-year budget and the budget alone. That's for the 2 months prior to the mid-year budget and the 2 months prior to the budget. That's mostly his bill has, for those time periods has been mostly mid-year and budget, including the prep work of reconciling and all that kind of work that he has to do to build the mid-year budget and the budget. So just that alone, out of the 70,000, 27,000 is for those two things that the finance director would be presumably taking on those responsibilities.
So if we filled the finance director position for the 24-25 year, it's the same, or there's cost savings in this budget?
There is
there
cost
more
savings, because what did you put your
expense
contract at?
associated with it?
Yeah, I'd have to go through it and do, that's a different analysis than the number I showed you, because keep in mind that in the current year, there's been significant vacancy savings. So your expenditure on finance staff is significantly less than it otherwise would be had you had two positions filled for the entirety of the year, especially with one of them as a finance director, which you haven't had in a long time. My guess is based on the current budget, okay, based on the current budget, from what we put together, you will need what's in the current budget to fill both positions for the entirety of the year, which is what's recommended. And with that, reduce contractual services in the finance department by $30,000. Okay, so that's all built in. Okay, so the assumption there is that with the new finance director position being filled, ultimately for the entirety of the year, you will save $30,000 on what I provide for you as those duties get assumed by somebody else.
So either way, you're paying the same amount, whether it
Right,
goes
right.
to consulting services.
It's a push, but it brings it in-house.
Correct. And it starts a transition. We need to start. I mean,
Well, if it keeps our outgo and everything pretty equal, I'm perfectly okay with that, but because we need to make sure that we don't spend more and commit to more at this time. But if it's a push and for potential cost savings, it makes sense.
I tried to keep the cost neutral.
Okay.
Okay. Using my, what I have contractually versus what the increase would be if you hired a finance director instead of a finance manager.
If it's cost neutral and it benefits the city, then I think that's appropriate.
and if you want us to do a deeper dive on that analysis,
Well,
certainly we can do that.
Yeah, I was letting Rick finish his comments. Exactly, right, exactly. That I was looking at there was going to cost, $25,000 or $30,000. But if it's, and clearly this needs to be done. I'm talking about in my mind, right now isn't the time to do that. I think we should revisit this in a few months, is what I'm saying. But, if we can see the numbers, we take a look at the numbers and discuss that on the 26th. If that's the pleasure of the council.
Can we keep it in the budget but not fill it? Does that make sense? Until we understand the math that you're talking about? So, let's dumb it down to preschool level. We're even, is what you're saying, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure about that.
I mean, what I would recommend instead is because, when you budget something and you don't fill it, you're sort of tying up that money. And as you can see, we're desperate for money. So I wouldn't want to tie something up that we're not using. We really can't afford to do that. I would recommend that if that's what you want to do, is fill the position at a later date in the fiscal year and put it into the budget that way.
Well, if it's cost neutral, I would support that.
Well, it won't be if it's like through half the fiscal year, because we're gonna, it's all gonna be, we're just gonna continue to use Andy in the same capacity for the next 6 months. Or more, depending on when the council
That's what-
decides that it's a good time to
I'd like,
do that.
I'd like to see some numbers.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll need to see the numbers then.
Because my thing is in 6 months, we might throw in our current budget out the window and re-looking at it anyways, right? If the sales tax measure passes, would we not be?
if
re-looking
it does
at
not
that?
pass, you mean?
Huh?
If it does not pass?
Well, either way, if it does or does not, will we not be going through those numbers and trimming off a little bit more? Or adding something to
Yeah,
that?
if the sales tax measure doesn't pass, we are going to be looking at a whole new world order, but it will require somebody still with a financial skill set, for sure. This isn't like some other positions that you could say, well, if we don't have a sales tax, maybe we'll be,
Right, that's not-
moving to
that-
something else.
Yeah,
No.
that's not my point. My point is,
We'll need one even
we can
more
add it
problematic.
then. As if we don't add it now, we can still add it when we have to go through those numbers either way, right? Or no?
I don't think you'd receive payment in that tax in order to use it for this fiscal year anyways.
No, the tax doesn't start rolling in until April. And we're going to be kind of
Last
on,
3 months of
on
the fiscal year.
fumes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So my recommendation then is to go ahead and put the numbers together, answer the rest of these questions. I would, if the council doesn't want to have another meeting, either on June 11th or a special meeting at which Andy would not be in attendance, then I would submit that I send this all of you electronically prior to, well in advance of the June 26th meeting, so that there can be at least some iterative conversations as necessary with myself and or Andy. If you don't want to have another special meeting, which is fine. I mean, does that sound amenable to the council?
So Marty, I just had a question. You said June 26th, so I'm not looking at my phone. I'm looking at the calendar, 2024 calendar here. That's a Wednesday, June 26th.
That is correct. That is, yeah.
Okay, so that.
We're asking to do another special meeting
Special
like
meeting,
this
right.
exactly for the
I
budget.
missed the word
That's,
special. So, okay,
sorry, correct.
that's all right. Okay. So that would be at what time?
Council's
With-
prerogative, how, if you want to do it in
Afternoon
the afternoon, the evening, however you want to do it, we'll do
Afternoon
it.
Meeting, gentlemen, afternoon meeting, sound good? 2 o'clock, does that work for staff?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
26?
Yep.
Okay.
That work for you?
Well, thank you for getting, putting that information together in advance.
We'll get that information together as quickly as possible and get it to the council, and then you can go from there.
Very good, then we can have further discussion on it. Anything else, Rick? Nope. No, David, Evan?
No.
Forrest? Fine. Any questions, comments from our team? Nothing? Okay, thank you for being here today. Absolutely. Marty, Andy, anything further?
I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Andy, thank you.
You're
very
welcome.
much. Thank you,
Yeah, thank you everyone for showing
Bye.
up.
So, time is 4:40 PM and meeting adjourned.
Thank you.